Joseph was 17 when his brothers decided to get rid of him. They were tired of his dreams, they were tired of him being the favorite son, and they were especially tired of that coat. And they were tired of him reporting back to their dad. So when they decided they wanted him gone, how lucky they thought that those Ishmaelites happened to be traveling by on their way to Egypt. They had wanted to kill him, but selling him was even easier. Plus, they received 20 pieces of silver for him. Reuben, the oldest brother, was not happy with this. He had planned to rescue Joseph, but now he was gone. The next task was to tell their father what happened to Joseph. They ripped the coat, they covered it with blood, and they gave it to Jacob, saying a wild animal had killed him. Jacob was devastated by this news. He tore his clothes in grief, and he proclaimed that he would go to his grave mourning his son. I would imagine that the brothers didn't expect Jacob to take the loss of his son so hard. They were wrong. Meanwhile, when the Ishmaelites arrived in Egypt, they decided to sell that strong young man to Potiphar, the manager of Pharaoh's household affairs. Dazed and confused, Joseph went where he was told. He was not alone, though, because God was with him. And because of this, things went well for him. Joseph lived in the house of the Egyptian master. Potiphar recognized the fact that God was with Joseph and that God was working for good in all he did. Potiphar then put Joseph in charge of all his personal affairs. And from that moment on, his home was blessed by God because of Joseph. God's blessing spread over everything that Potiphar owned. At home, in the fields, Potiphar had no worries. Life was good. There was one slight problem, though. His wife was attracted to Joseph, and when he turned down her affection, she was not very happy. Joseph asked her, "How can I violate Potiphar's trust? He treats me as his equal. How can I sin against God?" She was not pleased with that response and wanted to see him punished. So, when she tried to tempt him again, she had a plan. Joseph turned her down, she tore his cape, and then she made false accusations against him. Well, Potiphar was mad. He was very angry. After all, he had trusted Joseph completely. He had no choice but to throw him in jail with the other prisoners of the king. Poor Joseph. Things were just not going very well for him, but he did not worry because God was with him. He knew he was not alone. Because of God's love and kindness for Joseph, the head jailer liked and trusted Joseph. They were on such good terms that the head jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. Basically, he could do whatever he wanted. No matter what Joseph did, God made sure everything worked out for the best, according to the plan he had for Joseph. While in jail, Joseph met the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with them, and they ended up in jail. Joseph was in charge of watching over them. So one night, when each man had a dream that baffled and confused them, they talked to Joseph. And when Joseph saw that they were upset, he asked, what is troubling you? They told him they had dreams that they didn't understand. No one could interpret them. Joseph replied, "Don't interpretations come from God? Tell me the dreams." So the cupbearer's dream was about a vine with 3 branches. It had buds, it blossomed, and it produced ripened bunches of grapes. In the dream, he took the grapes and he squeezed the juice into the Pharaoh's cup, and then he gave the Pharaoh the cup. Joseph began to interpret his dream, saying the 3 branches equaled 3 days. Within those 3 days, the Pharaoh would be getting him out of jail, and the cupbearer would return to his job. He told the cupbearer to remember him when things were going well for him again, and to tell Pharaoh about him. The baker, having seen the cupbearer's dream was interpreted, decided to tell Joseph his dream. He said that in his dream, he had 3 baskets on his head, and the top basket contained assorted pastries, and the birds were picking at them. Joseph began to tell the baker that the 3 baskets represented 3 days. And within those 3 days, he told him, the baker would lose his head, be impaled, and the birds would pick his bones. This was not the happy interpretation that the baker wanted to hear. So in 3 days, during the Pharaoh's birthday, both dreams came true, according to Joseph's interpretations. However, the cupbearer went back to work for the Pharaoh and forgot all about Joseph. For 2 years, Joseph waited and waited, hoping that the cupbearer would remember his promise and get him out of jail. Joseph felt alone and abandoned. God was still working his plan, though. Even though things were moving slowly, God was moving parts of the puzzle, the plan for Joseph, into place. God is always with us, even when it feels like we're alone. The Pharaoh was having a terrible time. He started having dreams, and they kept him up at night. After tossing and turning, he finally fell asleep, only to have another dream. When the morning came, the Pharaoh was tired and very upset. What did these crazy dreams mean? He asked all of his magicians and sages of Egypt to explain them, yet no one had any answers for him. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He apologized for not remembering him sooner. The cupbearer explained to Pharaoh how he and the baker were in jail and they had dreams, and he told of a young Hebrew slave that interpreted each dream, and that dream turned out the way he said it would. So immediately, the Pharaoh sent for Joseph. He was taken from jail, given a haircut, new clothes, presented to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh told Joseph about this dream that had kept him awake and that no one could explain it. And then he asked Joseph if he could tell him what did that dream mean. Joseph answered, "Not I, but God. God will set your mind at ease." Pharaoh began to tell his dream, his first dream, which was about him standing on the bank of the Nile River. Suddenly, he saw 7 healthy cows come out of the river and graze in the grass. Behind them were 7 skinny, sickly, bony cows. And the 7 sickly, bony cows proceeded to eat the 7 healthy cows. But they remained bony and scrawny looking. They did not look like they had eaten anything. In the second dream, the Pharaoh saw 7 full, lush ears of grain growing out of a single stalk. Behind them were 7 shriveled, dried out ears of grain. The thin ears swallowed up the healthy ears. The Pharaoh asked Joseph, "What does all this mean? Can you help me?" So Joseph told the Pharaoh that both dreams meant the same thing. He told him that God was telling him what he planned to do. The 7 healthy cows and the ears of grain represented 7 years of plenty throughout Egypt. But after the 7 years, there would be 7 years of famine, which was represented by the skinny, bony, scrawny cows and the dried out ears of corn. These years of famine would erase all trace of Egyptian plenty. The famine would be total devastation. Joseph also said that because Pharaoh dreamed this twice, God was showing that this would be happening very soon. So, he instructed the Pharaoh to find someone who was wise and experienced to put in charge of the country. There needed to be managers throughout Egypt organizing and stockpiling food from the good years, and the grain was also to be stockpiled in towns just to be used during the famine years. So, the Pharaoh agreed and wondered who could they get to do such a job? Who could they find that had God's Spirit in them, like Joseph? And then Pharaoh told Joseph he was the man they needed. God had given him the gift of knowing what was going to happen. He had the wisdom and the experience needed for the job. So, Joseph was commissioned by the Pharaoh and put in charge of all of Egypt. The Pharaoh gave Joseph a signet ring, the best linen robes, a gold chain, and a second-in-command chariot to use. He told Joseph that even though he was the Pharaoh, no decisions would be made without Joseph's approval. Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian name, Sephanath Paneah, which meant God speaks and he lives. He also gave him an Egyptian wife. Joseph was 30 years old at this time. So during the 7 years of plenty, so much food was produced and stocked up in Egypt and the neighboring towns that they eventually stopped keeping track. Another of God's blessings to Joseph, he was blessed with 2 sons. The first one was named Manasseh, which meant forget. Joseph said that God made him forget all of his hardships and his parental home. His second son was named Ephraim, which meant double prosperity. He said that God had prospered him in the land of sorrow. After the 7 good years ended, famine spread throughout the land. Bread could only be found in Egypt. People started to panic, and the Pharaoh told them to go to Joseph and listen to his instructions. Joseph sold emergency supplies to the Egyptians, and as the famine grew worse, people came from all over to buy supplies from Joseph. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, Jacob, remember Jacob? Jacob heard there was food in Egypt and told his sons to go there and buy some. So Jacob sent the 10 older brothers, but not the youngest. He could not bear for something to happen to him as it had with Joseph. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they did not recognize Joseph, but he recognized them. They treated him with respect and they bowed down to him, just like in Joseph's dream. Joseph spoke roughly to them, and he asked them where they were from and if they were spies. And the 10 brothers denied being spies. They claimed to be honest men, sons of the same man in Canaan. They explained that once there was 12 of them, the youngest was still with their father, and the other brother was no more. Joseph said he would not believe them unless the younger brother came to Egypt. He threw the brothers into jail for 3 days, and on the 3rd day, Joseph said that since he was a God-fearing man, if they were truly honest men and did as he said, they would live. He said that one brother must stay in jail while the others went back to bring the younger brother to Egypt. He said they agreed to Joseph's demands. And then the brothers started talking. And they said, oh, now we are paying for what we did to Joseph. They saw that he had been scared and that he was begging for mercy, but they didn't listen. Reuben was who never wanted them to hurt Joseph. He told them, well, now we're paying for what you did to him, what you did to our brother. Joseph, who was standing there, who had been using an interpreter, turned away from them and cried. He heard everything that they said. He understood what they said. Finally, Joseph turned around and he took Simeon as prisoner. He had their sacks filled with grain as well as with the money that they brought. The brothers were also given food for the journey. So when the brothers stopped to rest along the journey, it was discovered that their money was returned. They were confused and afraid, and they were wondering what was God doing to them. When the brothers arrived in Canaan, they told their father everything. The famine grew worse, and Jacob told them that they needed to return to Egypt for more food. But he did not want them to take Benjamin, the youngest brother. He asked if they told the man in charge of their lost brother, and they said yes. They told their father that he had asked many questions about the family. And the brothers begged Jacob to let Benjamin go with them. Judah said he would accept all blame if he didn't return safely. Jacob finally agreed and instructed his sons to take the finest products from Canaan, as well as double the money to the man in Egypt. So, upon their arrival in Egypt, Joseph had them taken to his house. They were so worried about the money that they found in their sacks that they told the house steward about it. He told them, "Do not worry, everything is in order. Your God and the God of your father must have given you a bonus. I was paid in full." The brothers made themselves comfortable. So when Joseph arrived, they gave him all the gifts they had brought from Canaan. He welcomed them and asked about their father. They said he was still living, and then Joseph saw his younger brother, and he asked if he was the one that they had talked about. Then he said to Benjamin, "God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph left the room because he was overcome with emotion. And when he returned, the meal was served, and Benjamin's plate was piled higher with food, more food than the brothers. After the meal, the men's sacks were filled with as much food as could be carried, as well as their money. Joseph also had a silver chalice that was placed in the top of Benjamin's bag. As the brothers were preparing to leave, the house steward was told to stop them. He asked them, why had they paid back evil for good? The master's chalice that he drinks from was missing. The brothers denied having taken this chalice. They didn't know what he was talking about. And so they said if it was found on them, they would remain as servants and the person with the chalice would perish. The steward searched each bag and discovered the chalice in Benjamin's bag. The brothers were so distraught, they threw themselves down in front of Joseph. He asked them how they thought they could get away with stealing the chalice. Judah stood up and he asked how they could prove their innocence, saying that God was behind this, exposing how bad they were. The brothers were guilty and ready to be slaves for him. They were all in this together, equally guilty as the one with the chalice. Joseph said that all the men, except Benjamin, was to return to their father. Judah explained that they could not go back without their brother. Their father was devastated at the loss of his son, and to lose this one would put Jacob in his grave. Judah, who was behind Joseph's sale into slavery, offered to save his younger brother by staying in Benjamin's place. All at once, Joseph ordered everyone to leave the room except for him and the brothers. And then Joseph revealed his identity to them. He asked about his father. The brothers could not answer. They were speechless. They could not believe their eyes and ears. Joseph told them to come closer. He told them that he was their brother Joseph, the brother that they sold into Egypt. He also told them not to feel badly, not to blame themselves for selling him. God was behind it. God sent Joseph to Egypt ahead of them to save lives. The famine had been in the land for 2 years already and would continue for 5 more. God sent Joseph on ahead to pave the way and make sure there was a remnant in the land to save the lives in an amazing act of deliverance. He told them that it was not the brothers who sent him to Egypt. It was God. He put Joseph in place as a father to Pharaoh, put him in charge of Pharaoh's personal affairs, and made Joseph ruler of all of Egypt. Joseph then instructed his brothers to go back to Jacob and tell him that his son Joseph is alive and is the master of all of Egypt. He also told them to tell him to come as fast as he could to see Joseph in Egypt. Jacob would have a place to live close to his son Joseph. Jacob, his children, his grandchildren, his flocks, his herds, anything else he could think of. He was to bring all of it. Joseph promised to take care of Jacob completely. There were still 5 more years of famine ahead, and Joseph promised to make sure all of their needs were taken care of. Jacob and everyone connected to him. His family would not want for anything. The Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers had come, and he was pleased. He sent wagons from Egypt with them to help bring Jacob and all of his family and possessions back to Egypt. Before Jacob went to Egypt, he stopped in Beersheba, and he worshiped to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Jacob in a vision, and he said, "I am the God of your father. Don't be afraid of going down to Egypt. I'm going to make you a great nation there. I will go with you down to Egypt. I will also bring you back here. And when you die, Joseph will be with you, and his own hand will close your eyes." When Jacob's family arrived in Goshen, outside of Egypt, Joseph went to greet them. When he saw his father, Joseph cried. Joseph was reunited with his family, and he was able to provide for them during the famine as well as after the famine was over. Joseph forgave his brothers and assured them that they were not to blame. God has been with him through these years, blessing him every step of the way. Joseph spoke of his God all the time, and others could see the blessings that God bestowed upon him because of his faithfulness. Joseph spoke the truth of God all the time. He was not worried about offending anyone. He spoke of God clearly and consistently. God's plan for Joseph benefited all of those he came in contact with. Through Joseph, people of the world were saved from famine and witnessed the faithfulness of God in Joseph's life. Upon Jacob's death, Joseph took him back to be buried in Canaan. When he returned with his brothers to Egypt, the brothers were concerned how Joseph would treat them. Dad was gone now. So they sent him a note from his father, which he had said before his death. He wanted Joseph to forgive his brothers. When the brothers went to him and offered to be his slaves, Joseph replied, "Don't be afraid. Do I act for God? Don't you see? You planned evil against me, but God used those same plans for good, as you see all around you right now. Life for many people. Easy now. You have nothing to fear. I'll take care of you and your children." God has a perfect plan for each and every one of us. Trust in God, be strong in your faith, and forgive those who try to cause harm to you. Know that God is always working on your behalf according to his perfect plan. He loves you, and he will never leave you.